It's a somber morning here on the Dodson Corner podcast, especially for me, going 2 for 5 on my picks last night, watching Dricus do Plessis tap out Israel Adesanya, and watching Steve Erceg get chinned in the first round. Lucas?
It wasn't that bad for me. Well, Steve Erceg, that's brutal. Such a nice guy. Like, why does it have to happen to him?
Yeah, it looking in the moment, I think it didn't seem that bad just because it was a pretty good card, but just the morning after, the hangover,
UFC 305 hangover hits.
Yeah,
It's it was definitely a good card. There's tons of good fights, tons of good knockouts. But yeah, just the overall feel of the card, Steve Erceg getting KO'd, absolutely hyped for Dan Hooker. That's an awesome win for him. And then if you're an Izzy fan, that's tough. That's tough accepting that. Obviously, I predicted Dricus to win. Dylan predicted Izzy.
yeah.
Long day.
Yeah. Should we get into it with the main event?
Yeah, let's start off with the main event. So we had Dricus submitting Izzy in the fourth round. He tagged him with some shots. Izzy kind of slipped. That's what he said in the post-fight press conference. And then Dricus just hopped on his back and submitted him with a rear naked choke pretty quickly.
I mean, I thought it was pretty back and forth up until that fourth round. I know the judges had it 2-1. For Dricus, I personally had it 2-1 for Izzy, but it was very close. That first round, I think I was backwards. I had Izzy in the first round and Dricus in the second, but then the judges had Dricus in the first, Izzy in the second, but it was so back and forth. I mean, it would have been interesting if that fight would have gone all the way. We would have had to see what went on in the rest of the fourth and the fifth, but I thought it was overall a good fight. I mean, Dricus just always looks goofy. I said last night that Dricus fights like he's missing his glasses, and they told me to write that down in my notes to say it tonight, so there it is. I don't know, it hurts because I don't like Dricus. I like Izzy, but it's how it goes. You know, you're going to have upsets. You're going to have hype moments like when Patty tapped out Bobby Green. My greatest moment as a UFC fan, but
yeah, this is just a low for Izzy fans. But other than that, our picks, you got 2 out of 5 right. I got 3 out of 5 right. So obviously we had Carlos Prates winning in the first fight, and that was a huge knockout for him. That was a really sick fight. And then down the card, we had Tai Tuivasa versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik.
We'll get into it later with the controversy.
Yeah, the judging on that one was very interesting. But Rozenstruik very rightfully got the win. Split decision kind of sucks for his record, I guess, but I'm sure he's still happy he got the win. And then after that, we had Mateus Gamrot taking on Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker getting a pretty decent upset, which is awesome for him because, I mean, he's a dog. You see him get off that stool in the second round and he's like, oh, guys, I love this. You just love to see that. And then down the card again, we had Steve Erceg. I can't talk about it.
Yeah.
We're gonna move on. And of course, Dricus submitting Izzy. I got that one right. I thought it would go the distance. And I think if it did go the distance, it would have been super close, maybe a split decision. Dricus was looking gassed, but he looked gassed from the second round. So it's really hard to say. It's I saw a meme where it was like Dricus goes out, fights first round, gets gassed in the second round, ? And then wins. That's pretty much how his fights go. It's like, what happened where he got a random burst of energy? And yeah, like you said, his striking looks strange, but it clearly works. There's no denying anymore. He's beaten Rob Whittaker, he's beaten Sean Strickland and Izzy now. He's a good fighter, I guess.
I can't say that. There's parts of me that thinks is Dricus actually good now? And I'm he's not as bad as I think, but I can't. He is my least favorite fighter in the UFC, and I'm not gonna admit that he's a good fighter unless he fights Pereira.
I don't know.
I don't want that fight to happen. There's no gain for it from Pereira.
No. So for our biggest good surprise, who did we have? I had Erceg KO. That went backwards. I might have jinxed that one. I'm sorry.
I had Gamrot versus Hooker to be a 30-27 for Gamrot unanimous decision. That didn't happen either.
Yeah, that was I thought that was a lock. Like, I thought that was a pretty
I thought it
easy
was
one.
a lock too. Gamrot decision.
Yeah.
That was my lock of the night.
And then for biggest flop or biggest bust of the night, as Dylan wants to call it, I had Tai Tuivasa landing less than 15 significant strikes. And honestly, even though this fight went the distance, he only landed like 30 or 20 strikes.
Yeah, after the first round, he had like 4. And your prediction looked pretty good, but then he got a few in, especially in that third round. But I had Tai Tuivasa to get chinned in the first round as my biggest disappointment or biggest bust of the night. It did go to the decision, but he didn't look that great in the fight. Like, he showed some life, but I think it's pure from him just having some power and swinging his arms.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting what they do with him in the future. Like, he showed that he's good enough to be in the UFC, but he didn't show that he's good enough to make the rankings. And losing 5 straight fights, I think he's going to be just fighting in random
Apex.
nights and Apex cards and
Yeah.
fed to the up-and-comers because he has a little bit of name value and a little bit of personality.
And yeah, Australia has their own Tony Ferguson now. So enjoy that. I mean, the card overall, I thought it was a good card. The main event, even though if you're upset that Dricus won, it was a brawl of a fight. I think, in my opinion, Izzy looked good, better than he did in Strickland, not as good as he did in his prime. He just didn't look quite as sharp with his counterattacks. He didn't look quite as forceful getting up and kind of making space on the ground so that Dricus couldn't submit him. This is the very first time in his career he's been submitted and the first time he lost twice in a row. But maybe that's also just like a testament to how much the division is changing as well.
And Dricus is a big boy. He's thick compared to Izzy, who's taller and lankier. So.
Yeah, I did the math. Izzy said he weighed in at a certain kilogram amount, and in pounds, it was 201 pounds, I believe. So he was in the ring at 201 pounds, and that's the biggest that Izzy's ever been in the ring.
By about 6 pounds. It was 5 pounds, I think.
Yeah.
It was 2.5 kg, so about 5 or 6 pounds. I just want to highlight a little bit about that Gamrot and Hooker fight. I found that it was super competitive, back and forth fight, and Hooker surprisingly defended the takedowns really well.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what he could potentially do against some of the top 5 lightweights who are very jiu-jitsu and wrestling based. Like, could he compete against like a Charles? I saw that was a fight. I think he's probably either fighting Gaethje or Charles next. I think both would be awesome fights, and I think for Charles and Gaethje it would be good fights for them to really, because they're both kind of fading a little bit out of the title picture after both coming off losses, to really maybe put them back into that title picture.
Yeah, they're both coming off losses, which is perfect. You match up Dan Hooker, who's on a 3-run win streak right now, and Oliveira or Gaethje, who's on a 1-fight losing streak. So that's a good fight for everyone, the fans included. That would be a banger, especially Gaethje. They're just going to stand up and fight. So I think December would be a great time for that card.
310.
310.
Yeah, I could see that being a 310 co-main. One thing I wanted to note about the Dan Hooker and Matthias Gamrot split decision was how one judge actually had Dan Hooker winning the first round, but then lost the second round, where the other 2 judges had Gamrot winning the first round and Hooker winning the second, which I find really weird, because then you bring in, did Gamrot get robbed? Because that judge clearly had that first round wrong. Gamrot looked really good in that first round against Hooker. So
it wasn't a robbery by any means.
Yeah,
it was just a close fight.
Looking on Instagram and X after it, everyone's like, "Oh, Gamrot got robbed. Gamrot got robbed." It was a competitive fight. If that fight would have gone either way, it was up in the air. It's not like we had the other judging scandal.
Yeah. Did we talk about that yet?
We haven't.
So, yeah, if you didn't watch the card, Tai Tuivasa versus Rosenstrike was a split decision. Some judge, the middle judge, gave the fight 30-27 to Tai Tuivasa when Tai landed 4 strikes in the first
22.
round.
Significant strikes 22-4, and had Tai Tuivasa winning the first round.
Yeah, that's some crazy judging, and rightfully so. This judge got kicked out because he was supposed to judge the co-main event. That wouldn't have mattered because it ended in a knockout, but he got kicked out by the Commission of Australia. And that's the first time that's ever happened. And I think it should happen more often if there's crazy judging like that. I don't think Dana would be opposed to that at all.
Yeah, Dana don't mess around, and I don't see that judge ever judging again.
No.
It was terrible. Yeah. It was so clear, hometown bias.
if you gave one round maybe to tie and you just saw something and you didn't see a bunch of other things, maybe. But 3 rounds in a row is unacceptable.
Numbers don't lie. Even if you're just watching that without the numbers, it was clearly Rosenstrike. It was terrible on his behalf.
Yeah. And moving on, breaking down the Ursig fight a little bit. There wasn't a lot to break down because it ended super early, but Ursig's movement looked good in the first couple exchanges. He was just staying outside of the range of Kai Kara-France, but he did that multiple times in a row, and eventually Kai Kara-France was able to time him, unfortunately, and it was a clean hook, and that's it. He wasn't recovering after that. He tried to grab the leg, shoot for a takedown, but he was really wobbled, unfortunately.
Yeah, Ursig really didn't have a chance to get it going. He got knocked down twice, and yeah, before he got off, there was one left that he got in that looked really good, but that was primarily it for his offense in that fight before Kai Kara-France got him twice. After that first knockdown, Ursig was clearly rattled, and then it just took one more to get him done.
And yeah, we already talked about the main event, Izzy versus DDP. Submission for DDP, and he actually has a lot of submissions. I don't know if you knew this, but he has something like 11 submission wins, which is more than he has KOs. So he's actually a pretty major threat on the ground. And Pereira's talking about moving back down to middleweight, which I think is a horrible idea. Yeah. There's no reason for him to do that. He's had so much success in light heavyweight, and I think if anything, he moves up like he was talking about. And I think this definitely goes to show that the UFC was setting up a super fight with Adesanya.
100%. He had that post ready either way. But yeah, if Pereira hadn't been a middleweight champion in the past, I could see a little bit why he would want to go down, because maybe he thought it would be an easier title to become a double champion than going up. But the fact that he's already been a middleweight champion, there's really no point. And he said it would be a one-time thing. Like, there's no point of just going down, winning that championship again, and then going back up. Like,
yeah, because you just have to vacate the belt.
Exactly. Like, it would not do enough for his legacy to be worth the risk of the fight.
Yeah. And obviously, I'm sure he's kind of peeved that he ended that Adesanya trilogy on a loss. I don't think DDP's a good matchup for him, to be honest. We've seen DDP, he's able to take people to the ground, he's able to get the submission, and he's a big guy. So I think Pereira cutting down all that weight to get down to 185 probably wouldn't be a good matchup for him. But I think people need to realize that Pereira's willingness to cut down to 185, fight someone who can wrestle and get submissions, who can actually get submissions, not just wrestle and get a decision. That should show you that he is not scared to fight Ankalaev. Like, am I crazy for saying that?
I don't think Pereira's scared to fight Ankalaev.
No.
I think this is another reason that shows that he's not scared. Pereira wants to fight, and he wants to prove his dominance, you know?
Well, 100%.
Yeah. I think before we end off, I want to just go over the prelims a little bit. There was more controversy. I don't think it was super controversial, but in the Junior Toffa versus Walter Walker fight we had when Toffa just screamed and then the ref called the fight.
That's a tough one.
It is tough. He screamed in agony, but I don't know what those refs talk about in the room before they go out there, but
yeah,
if that's how it goes and you got to call it after that, I do think it's different that it was 4 seconds left in the round that he called that, you know, like.
Yeah, so in the changing rooms in Australia and New Zealand, they tell them that if there's any like verbal outcry of pain where like it sounds like you need help, then they're going to stop the fight. So that, you know, if they know about that, if Junior Taffa knew about that, it is completely on him, and he doesn't have the right to get mad and slap the opponent.
Yeah.
That was a little bit childish. But again, like 4 seconds in the round.
If that's how they want to call it, that's how they're going to call it.
Yeah.
And one more prelim fight I want to talk about before we end off was how bad Josh Culiano sold that fight. Richard Yamos was on one leg, literally with 3.5 minutes left in that second round. Just giving it up. He was basically ready to die. He had one foot in the grave.
You were screaming calf kick TKO.
Yeah.
And then he just stopped punching.
Yeah, he just let him get back up. And then he started doing the theatrics and the dancing. And to do that and then lose the fight just makes you look like a fool. That was ridiculous. Whoever his coaching staff is, they need to scold that man. He sold that fight. He had that fight won. And then to go on and lose that fight is just ridiculous. Like, oh, it just irks me. He had that fight and just gave it away.
Yeah, and then the Australians on the prelims, Jack Jenkins and Tom Nolan, both looked super impressive. Obviously, you have to take it with a grain of salt on these Australian cards and the UK cards. They kind of give some of their prospects a bit of a layup in their opponents, but Tom Nolan and Jack Jenkins both looked very dominant in the striking, and just overall really awesome performances to watch. The Herbert Burns fight, that's Gilbert Burns' brother, and he just gave up in the third round. He could not get up.
Oh yeah, I saw that. He was gone.
So that was pretty brutal. But yeah, that's our UFC 305 instant reaction. Overall, very solid card, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Peace.